But anyway, let's talk about the violence.
Um,
Yeah, there was
okay.
some.
All right. Well, Justin, you set us up since you wrote the article.
Well, long story short, famous Olympic ice skater Scott Hamilton wrote an article for Kotaku.
It'd be so great if it actually was that.
Yeah, no. Kirk Hamilton wrote an article for Kotaku about how essentially BioShock has all the right elements to be what he calls that game, the game that you can show anybody of any age, whether or not they've played a video game, and say, this is what I've been talking about. This is games as an art form. This is incredible, and you should play it. And then he takes on the mindset of that person who's never played games before and just walks through everything from landing in Rapture to the moment that you go to throw the baseball. And he's like, wow, look at the sky, look at the statue, look at these people, look at these hot dogs, look at the fair. And then look, oh my God, I'm shoving this guy's head into a spinning blade of hooks and mutilating him. And then from that point on, the game is violent. And that huge stark contrast of beauty to violence is what will only make BioShock Infinite be remembered as a good game instead of a great game, because it's just too violent for how deep the narrative is trying to be. And I think, and I mean, the article I wrote is just, when it comes to the violence in BioShock, I think we're asking the wrong questions. And it's not why. It shouldn't be why did it have to be violent. It should be how else could this story have been told that would have had the same effect? And I don't think that there's an answer to that. And it's also, violence isn't going anywhere because we haven't figured out the new way to tell these stories. Ken Levine said it best when he said, I like a good narrative, but I like a good challenge, and the most accessible challenge, since, game making is a sales game, the most accessible challenge is the FPS. So how do I tell this story, and how do I do it effectively while making it an accessible challenge, is to have that violence. And since we don't know a new way, we don't know an alternative to that, how do we balance violence as an art form in storytelling? Because newsflash, games aren't the first medium to balance violence as a thematic element. Like I said to Jared, and I said in my article, to say, pretend you've never played a video game before, then play BioShock Infinite, is like saying, pretend that you've never read a book before, now go read A Clockwork Orange. It's a classic piece of literature. It defines a generation. It's truly a piece of art, and it is an extremely violent book. And so I just feel like it's so easy to pick on shooters, and I feel like to harp on the violence in BioShock, it just shows that you don't get what the game is about, and you don't understand utopia as a storytelling element, and you don't understand violence as a thematic element, and that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's the thing I had a problem with, the idea that the violence isn't tied into what Infinite is, as if like the violence could somehow be removed from Infinite's overall narrative and still make sense.
Important. Like, what do they not want? They don't want as much blood and gore, which there really wasn't any of that, really.
The way he puts it that I think is most succinct. Hold on a second. Hey, stop it.
We're going to leave that in, by the way.
Yeah, just leave it in.
We're leaving all this in.
You have a cat named P?
The cat's
that's his roommate.
His roommate's peeing on a cat.
No, I lost. The most succinct part of his argument is he shows a GIF of Elizabeth dancing on the pier, and he says, "Why couldn't we have had more of this?" And then he shows a GIF of bloody murder of Crow's Trap, where it's just the blood and the bodies and the crows flying around, and less of this. And
which is such a bad example.
Yeah, we can have dancing and frivolity and guitar playing and moments like that in a game and still have the violence and have it balanced against, use as a thematic element. And I think that BioShock, of all first-person shooters, did a pretty good job of that. And the other thing is, the parts with the skyhook where you're grinding into people's faces with the skyhook is optional, and I couldn't even get the timing down for it until like the end of the game when I got it like once. So I played the whole game not even knowing that you could do that.
Yeah.
So it didn't even strike me. The violence didn't strike me as over the top or bizarre in any way. It it just was part of the story and it fit. It wasn't like Call of Duty where you're just killing to kill, or Dead Space 2 where you're just violent and gory for the sake of, shock value and sales. So I don't think you could have removed the violence in any logical fashion.
Yeah. That'd be kind of dumb because it was the actual battle to get out of there, and they were all against you. So it makes sense that the officers and, Comstock was sending armies against you. He even says at the end.
Yeah.
You fought through everything that I sent against you. So, it wasn't over the top either.
A lot of these people, like Chris Plant, talked about it in his Polygon article, and Kirk in his Kotaku article, where they're saying, like, I wanted to play this with my girlfriend or wife or whatever, and they just like were taken aback by the violence. But what if it was all sneaking? Like, your girlfriend's not going to want to sit there for like 15-20 minute sections of you sneaking around either.
And here's the thing.
It's a ridiculous argument.
I'm sick and tired of the what about my girlfriend, wife, sister, fiance argument, because it's dumb and it's irrelevant, because girls aren't the only people who are squeamish at violence. There are guys that are squeamish at violence too.
Absolutely.
And there are girl gamers who wish that they could play these games with their boyfriends, and the boyfriends don't want to see it. So,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a completely irrelevant argument. It's completely outdated because gaming is not a strictly male activity anymore. And at the same time, I was sitting with Terry, and I know the listeners don't really know this, even though there aren't really any listeners, but my fiance, Terry,
he's not going to like us, but whatever.
We were sitting and talking about it, and she was saying, I've been wanting her to see The Walking Dead because I think it's just so phenomenal. And she says, I wish I could see The Walking Dead, but it's too gory and it's too violent and it's not for me. But she watches this show called Pretty Little Liars, which is all about, murder and backstabbing and all that kind of stuff. She's, I could handle a game with that level of violence, but I can't handle a game like Walking Dead. And when I went and restarted BioShock Infinite, she started watching it. And when we got to the fair, she was watching it. And I'm like, you remember what happens here. You don't want to see this. And she's like, okay. And she covered her eyes, and we went through the violence, then we moved on. So for these people to be making these arguments like, man, this game could be great, but I can't play it with my wife. Well, it sounds more like you have a problem with your wife than you do with BioShock Infinite.
Yeah, leave her.
Yeah,
Well, so don't play it with your wife. Who cares?
Yeah, that's not whether or not your spouse, be it male or female, wants to play this game with you is not indicative of the quality of the game. It's
Absolutely.
just your own personal opinion.
It's a single-player game. Jeez.
And and Kirk Hamilton ends it. What does he say then? He goes, as far as the violence is concerned, I'm okay with it. I've been playing games for years, so bring it on. I just don't think I'll be inviting my sister into the room anytime soon. Okay. Sorry?
The idea that the game, well, you already said that it's not indicative of the quality of the game just because someone doesn't like one aspect of it. Someone might not want to play Proteus because all you do is walk around and explore the entire time and there's no gamey elements to it. Doesn't make it a bad game. It's just someone doesn't like that. And it's ridiculous. His one comment about, like you mentioned, the dancing part and then the crows part, the whole dancing section, that part on the beach, is not even about the overall story. It's just about the relationship of Elizabeth and her coming out after being cooped up for her entire life and just experiencing these things. It's just a nice moment in the game, but it's not like you can't make a whole game out of that.
No,
it's just a ridiculous argument.
Yeah, I mean,
it's irrational.
Oh, good one.
No, when I read that article, it just struck a chord, and I was like, okay, we're clearly focusing on the wrong things here. And I'm not saying that Chris Plant or Kirk Hamilton or even Scott Hamilton has to like BioShock Infinite and all of it and everything about it. I'm just saying, if you're going to nitpick, you can complain about any game for the violence. And this game is one that it actually makes sense. It's not over the top. It's not encouraging in such a way that it's like, okay, well, clearly I'm going to go out. This game's going to inspire me to go out and skyhook people in the face. So, did Jared die? Oh no, there he is. Okay. So it's just one of those things where it's like, where are we reaching for with this? What is your overall goal? You're telling me that this game about utopia is too bloody and violent? Have you ever read anything about utopian societies? they operate on the idea that everything is beautiful on the face, but the underworkings are extremely violent and an utter failure.
There's another moment, or another thing in Chris Plant's article on Polygon, where he talks about Tarantino's Pulp Fiction or the Thin Red Line, and he says how those stories have something to say about violence. We're missing the point that the violence in BioShock isn't to say something about violence. The violence is just a reaction to the world that he's in and what he has to do to get these things done. It's not about the violence. Ken Levine and the team at Rational didn't set out to create a story to talk about violence.
No.
It's about surviving.
It's about boobs.
Take the violence out, and what do you have? It's like Jared saying, take the Hall of Heroes out, take Finkton out. You don't have much of a game anymore. What do you have? Take the violence out. What do you have? You don't have a game. You have a really pretty narrative, and that's all you have.
Let's see. Are they arguing for like point and click games or what?
No, they're just arguing for the fact that and the way Kirk Hamilton says, this is a phenomenal story. Why lessen it by telling it down the barrel of a gun?
It's such a dumb argument because it's like you're trying to argue that's not what the game was created for, and that's such a dumb argument just to basically want it to be a completely different game. Like, that's not what it's going for. It's going for a game that clearly has violence as a large element of it.
And I think that if Ken Levine had said the BioShock Infinite was going to be a puzzler or something like that, I feel like less people would have played it. It wouldn't have gotten the same critical acclaim because it wouldn't have been as accessible, which is what he recognizes when he says, I wanted to make a game and I wanted to make a good story, and if I wanted people to play it, it had to be accessible. So I feel like you would have lost that accessibility, you would have lost your audience, you would have lost the critical acclaim, and we wouldn't even be having this discussion. So the fact that we're merely having this discussion is why it's necessary that this story was told the way that it was, because it allows us to have these intellectual conversations, whether or not it's entirely relevant. In the case of violence, in BioShock, it's not entirely relevant. But we wouldn't even be having this talk if it had been any other kind of game. So what exactly is it that you want from this?
Well, look at the movie Django Unchained. Have you guys seen that?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, that movie's fantastic. And Christopher Waltz, Jamie Foxx both do a fantastic job in it. And there's tons of violence. I mean, it's a Tarantino movie, so it's filled with violence. But the violence doesn't detract from the overall experience. And it's actually a part of the overall movie. You can't remove the violence from that, and it would still be the same thing. Same thing with BioShock. You can't just remove the violence from that, and it would still be the same experience.
The main problem I had with his article was one of the first things that we said was it could have been that game that he mentions that, and I just have a problem with why do we have to have one game? Like,
I agree.
We always try and say let's get girl gamers and my wife, my girlfriend, all this stuff in here. Like, if they want a good story, they can go, and not with non-violence, they can go play Journey or like Thomas Was Alone or all these games that we always talk about, or and if they do like violence, like there's always The Walking Dead tells an amazing story, with some zombies and stuff. Like, there's already so many games out there that tell great stories in many different ways. Like, you don't have to just pick on BioShock for having a few extra bloody scenes in it. Like, it's just an FPS. Like, so you mash a guy's face in. Like, who cares?
Well, it's not any more starkly violent than I'd say just about any other game.
Any other mainstream
FPS.
game out there right now. Yeah.
Well, at the end of the day, why? I just hate the notion of if they would have just changed this one thing, then this person who's not into video games would finally get into video games. It's like when the Wii was gonna. I think we lost Justin. Did we? Oh, anyway.
Hi.
Oh, okay.
I'm here.
It's like when the Wii was around and everyone was like, "Oh, this is the one that's gonna get your girlfriend into gaming." It's like, no, either you're into it or you're not, and that's just the bottom line. So, saying removing this element or adding this element, either they have an interest in playing interactive game, like gaming media, or they just don't. So,
and there's no one game that's going to change it. There is no one universal game. And if BioShock had been told less violently, and I don't even think it was told all that violently. If it had been told without violence, period, Terry is not going to all of a sudden want to play BioShock.
Yeah, like as far as I'm concerned, like if you take away the skyhook, and there actually was a lot less blood than I thought there was going to be.
Yeah.
All you gotta do is take away the skyhook, and I almost saw zero blood.
And overall, BioShock's art style has always been fanciful, over the top. So even the more violent bits have been muted by the art style of the game. So
It all looks like jelly or paint falling out of someone.
Yeah.
It looks ridiculous anyway.
yeah, the closest you get is that first kill, and I think that's just supposed to set up the pandemonium.
Yeah.
That kind of echoes throughout the rest of the game. Because even when you kill other people, you just kind of deck them with the skyhook, and that's about it.
The thing that bothers me about this is that I feel like this is a bunch of like game journalists sitting around and like trying to be very deep and trying to I don't know, like this whole movement of how like we have to remove violence because violence is such a bad. I mean, not that any of us are in huge favor of violence, but violence is a very powerful storyteller. It can be very important. I mean, yeah, it can be gratuitous and senseless, absolutely, but it can also be used in very powerful ways. And I hate how it's like in the industry, once someone has an opinion, everyone else was like, well, we got to jump on board with that because if we don't, then somehow we're seen as like the bad people. So some of these opinions I'm saying seem forced because someone starts it and everyone else seems like, well, we've got to feel the same way about it because we're nasal gazing.
Yeah, and everybody wants the traffic, and the traffic comes when you agree with the mainstay.
I just hope game developers realize that you shouldn't shy away from violence just because a couple people start talking about game violence. I mean, there's a huge amount of people out there who like just where it's at, or they like a little more, or a little less, or here and there, or whatever. I mean, look at the newest Mortal Kombat that came out. I mean, it sold like hotcakes because it was right back to its roots. So, I mean, I don't know.
But yeah, I think we've kind of exhausted our conversation at this point.